What are your thoughts on Ozempic and similar drugs?
So I think there are some use case scenarios where it makes sense. I think it's going to be I think it's clearly being overprescribed. I think it's going to harm a lot of people. I think that it's probably being utilized in sort of a indiscriminate fashion, which I think there's going to be, I mean, certain percentage of people are going to lose weight. The problem is, again, it's a disease maintenance issue that you have to be on this drug the rest of your life, which, at $1,000 is an injection or a month or whatever they're charging for it. Um, you know, Here's the deal with Ozempic. It's a GLP-1 receptor agonist. So basically, GLP-1 is a what's called an incretin hormone. So the way it works normally in humans is, we eat food, nutrition kind of winds its way through our intestine. As it gets to the end of the intestine, in the area called the ileum, there are cells, these so-called L cells, that will sense nutrition. And when they see there's too much protein or too much fat getting down there, it'll send out this GLP-1, which will say, slow things down. The gut needs to slow down so we have more time to absorb the stuff. That's the normal way it happens. And that hormone will last 5 minutes or so, and then it'll kind of go away. These drugs, you get a massive dose of that, and it just stops everything. It says, gut, slow down. And then we get this sense of satiety and fullness, and we just don't want to eat. A lot of people get nauseous. A lot of people vomit. We see the side effects where they get the so-called gastroparesis, where their gut is paralyzed. Sometimes that's relatively permanent. Um, but the other thing is it decouples some of the metabolism in the fat cell. And so what happens is you get this fat cell hyperplasia. And maybe you're familiar with that term with muscle building. There's hypertrophy where things get bigger, and hyperplasia where more things are created. So what happens is, instead of fat cells getting bigger and bigger, which is pathologic, it's problematic, it's related with insulin resistance, the fat cells don't get bigger. They what they do is they grow. There's more of them. You get more little fat cells, but because there's so little, it takes up less room. So you actually lose weight. The problem with that is when you go off the drug, now you have a lot more fat cells than you started with. And so, if you go off the drug and you for whatever reason, you can't afford it, or you have too many side effects, now you're going to have this situation where now you have more fat cells than you used to. And that has a potential, because those fat cells get bigger and bigger over time because your appetite comes back, and sometimes with a vengeance. The other thing is, obviously, there's a high percentage of muscle loss that occurs, and lean mass and bone loss. And so we're starting to see, particularly women, developing osteoporosis. And it's because, they go to the quack shack, or the pill, the pill website, and, they get put on the drug. They don't exercise, they don't strength train, they don't eat enough protein. And so they just lose all this lean mass. And so, it's, in the short term, they lose those 20 pounds, but they've lost muscle mass and bone mineral density. And so what happens is when they go off the drug, now they're starting in a place where they're going to gain all the fat back. But as you know, it's hard to put that muscle back on. You got to get in the gym and work hard. And so you may end up with people that are in worse condition. Now, if somebody is like super morbid obese, you know, this is the same scenario where we talk about gastric bypass procedures. Maybe the net benefit for those guys is that, they can actually get healthier, because clearly living at 400 pounds is a big threat to your health. I mean, you're going to die early, most likely. I mean, there's no, this healthy at any size, as you probably know, is a bunch of BS. I mean, if you're morbidly obese, you're sick. I don't care. Maybe you haven't shown it yet, but you're definitely not healthy. And so for those folks, it probably makes sense. For the person that wants to lose 20, 30 pounds, it makes no sense at all to me. It really doesn't. I mean, I think it's a shame. And that's honestly where most of this use case scenario is going to be. That's where most people, because most people go online, they say, I'm 20 pounds overweight. It's like all this stuff, like the erectile dysfunction drugs. You just go online and say, I need this, and they send it to you in the mail. And it's there's going to be a lot of people harmed from this, unfortunately. And the problem is, it won't get pulled. This is something that I didn't realize. So there's a lot of severe side effects. Like, I talk to ER physicians, and they say every day they get people coming into ER on these drugs, chronic, they're having obstructive, bowel issues. They're vomiting. They're having this horrible nausea. It's happening every day. And I said, well, how much is that's getting reported back to the FDA? And they're like, well, we don't. No, not much, none of it. And we have this reporting system in the US. It's called MedWatch, right? It's supposed to be when a drug is brought to market, They do this limited testing. You know, the FDA says, well, you've done us testing, we'll bring it on the market. But you're supposed to do this post-market surveillance that once it gets on the market, you're supposed to surveil that stuff. But apparently less than 1% of complications actually get reported. So by the time you get enough reports to actually pull something from the market, probably 100-fold has already occurred. So if we hear about one death, there's probably 100 that never got reported. It may not be death, but it might be like ER. I went to the ER because I couldn't stop vomiting or I had gastroparesis. Those things, only about 1% of those get reported. So it's one of those things where I think that, there'll be a lot of class action lawsuits against it. They're already forming. If it'll ever get pulled, I don't know. I mean, what'll happen is Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly will maybe they'll pay $1 billion fine, slap on the wrist, and they'll of the 100 billion they made, 1%, and it's calculated into the cost of the drug anyway. So, I think it's far better to fix lifestyle, but the problem is it's really tough. It's tough to do that, particularly in the context of the modern medical system. When I was working as an orthopedic surgeon, I'd be seeing 50 patients a day. So you get 5-6 minutes with a patient. How much lifestyle are you going to do in 5 to 6 minutes? Almost none, because you're spending your time coding and billing and typing and trying to talk to the patient and look at their x-ray and read their labs. There's no time for a discussion about, hey, you need to eat this way and exercise. And so that's a real problem. It's not incentivized. I can tell you, when I started talking about to my hospital administration back in 2012 or something like that, I said, hey guys, I'd like to spend maybe half a day a week counseling people on lifestyle. Guess what they said? Hell no. We don't want you doing that, because you're losing money. We're paying you to cut people, right? That's basically what they told me in a nice, polite way. Basically, we don't have an appetite for that. We don't know if we can support that. Basically, they're saying, shut up and cut people, right? And I was like, I don't think that's cool. I don't want to do that. So now, this is where our company Rivero comes in. We said, look, we're going to take the time with our patients. We're going to provide them support and daily feedback so that they can actually, do the lifestyle stuff. Because it's not, some people you're going to say, hey, go read this book, and they'll do it. Most people, they need hand holding, they need motivation.